Right.
Okay. Okay, so hello everybody, and welcome to this seminar, which is organized in the framework of the seminars of the Center for Advanced Studies Southeast Europe of Rijeka. We will we are recording this Zoom panel, which will be later circulated. And I'm very delighted that today we'll have a chance to present Dominique Reill's book, The Fiume Crisis, Life in the Wake of the Habsburg Empire. I hope that in the future it will be possible to organize something and get together in person, but at least for now we managed to do it this way. I believe this is a very important book for Rijeka itself, so I'm very happy that we will present it within this framework. And I'm also happy that besides Dominique, we have two other panelists who are extremely knowledgeable on the history and history of culture of Rijeka after the First World War, Natka Badurina and Ivan Jeličić. Rijeka, just to give you a bit of a context, Rijeka has been in the spotlight of international attention in the aftermath of the First World War, because, as you know, it was a matter of contention at the Paris Peace Conference, but also because of D'Annunzio's expedition. There is an enormous literature on this topic. I would say that the majority of this literature looks primarily at what the city represented for the Italian and the Croatian or Yugoslav nation building process and nationalist movements, but it looks less at the city itself. And that's exactly what Dominique Reill does in this book, which shows that some people in Rijeka, Fiume actually loved Italy, some others loved the Yugoslav idea or cultivated the myth of autonomous Fiume, but perhaps many more loved normal life, business, the economic stability that the city enjoyed before the war, and tried to cope with the challenging circumstances the city was going through after the demise of the Habsburg framework. So the Fiume Crisis started in the second half of 1918, which means more than 100 years ago. But as we have seen in the last couple of years, when there was the centenary, this question is still able to stir controversies, and I would like to encourage you to read this book, even if you are not an expert on post-Habsburg study, because it tackles some questions which are incredibly timely. Just to name a few of them, it deals with the economy in transition, it deals with the boundaries of belonging in contested national communities, it deals with the boundaries of citizenship, but also with the construction of reality done by political propaganda. So should any of you be interested in buying this book, it is possible to get a 20% discount on its price, and I will circulate this information in the chat box. I will now introduce more in details all the speakers. Dominique Kirchner Reill received her PhD with distinction from Columbia University and is currently Associate Professor of Modern European History at the University of Miami. Her first book, Nationalists Who Feared the Nation, Adriatic Multinationalism in Habsburg Dalmatia, Trieste, and Venice, was published by Stanford University Press in 2012, while The Fiume Crisis came out just one month ago. And she's already working on her next book project, which is tentatively titled The Habsburg Major of New York, Fiorello LaGuardia. Currently, she's visiting a scholar at the European University Institute in Fiesole, Firenze, where she's currently based. And that's why she's able to join us at this time in the morning. Natka Badurina is an associate professor at the University of Udine. Her main fields of research are comparative literature and memory studies. And in particular, she studies Italian-Croatian relations during the 20th century and the memory of political violence in testimonies, literature, and art. She has written several scientific articles on the Impresa di Fiume, Fiume's enterprise, dealing with the politics of memory and the history of emotions. While Ivan Jeličić obtained his PhD in history at the University of Trieste with a dissertation on the socialist movement in Fiume during the late Habsburg period. He's currently a postdoc fellow in the ERC project Nepostrans at the Institute of Political History in Budapest. But he's also a research assistant in the project Rijeka in Flux, Borders and Urban Change after World War II, University of British Columbia, Okanagan, and collaborates with the Department of History and Department of Italian Studies at the University of Rijeka. He has published extensively on political figures and associations of late Habsburg and post-Habsburg Fiume, Rijeka. So apart from the University of Miami, we have a very wide range of post-Habsburg affiliations here. I'm also based at the Masaryk Institute and Archive of the Czech Academy of Sciences. And until 1 month ago, I was a fellow of the Center for Advanced Studies in Rijeka. I would say that even if this book is very young, it has already been presented in other panels, but here we will try to make it more Rijeka focused, a more Rijeka focused presentation. So I will give the floor to Dominique for a short presentation. She will briefly walk us through the book, and then we will move on with the first round of questions.
Okay, actually, I know it's so American to say this, but I was really excited about doing this because, as I said when we were prepping, I usually spend most of my time going, there's a world, it's called Rijeka. And I'm just gonna skip all that because what's really fun is we're at home. I mean, even though we're not, but I'm gonna share a screen and I'm only gonna talk for a little bit. I'm going to talk about what I think this book is trying to do and where it's coming from. And then I'm just going to let you know that these questions that they've prepared are not easy. And so I think that they're going to lead to more discussion than we normally have in these kinds of situations. So I'm not going to talk a lot right now. I hope we'll talk more with question and answer. So how did we get to this book? I am not from Croatia. I am not from Italy. Rijeka is a world that I am constantly trying to figure out. So it's not a natural thing for me to have written this book. It came out of my first book. I saw Matteo was on this Zoom. I met him when I was a graduate student in Zadar, trying to work on this book, which was it came out while I was studying Croatian in Zagreb, and I was, you know, I'm a nerd, so I was taking Croatian classes in the morning, and then I would go to the library at the National Library in Zagreb, and just try and read in Croatian. And I found this article from the I think it was the late 50s, about these two guys from Dubrovnik and how they published this series in the Favela and the Trieste News Journal about Slavic culture and Slavic nation. And this idea of that Italian nationalists were publishing Slavic nationalist texts in the 1840s kind of blew my mind. And I was wondering why did it blow my mind? And so I wrote this book basically trying to figure out for myself, why did this surprise me? How had I been trained to see the Italian Risorgimento and the Narodny Preporod as two different and maybe even opposing phenomena, especially if you were thinking about the Adriatic. This was an intellectual history. It was a group history. It was about ideas, and it was about how ideas get formed in movement, in discussion, in dialogue, in the context of changing times. The book was about how ideas aren't fixed, right? And so that these people who maybe in the 1840s thought that the Risorgimento and the Preporod could be working together, by the 1850s, most of them had given up that idea and had a much more, what we would consider expected vision of the relationship between different nationalisms on the Adriatic. I'm just bringing this up because I think it's really important to see how different the Rijeka book is from the first book. They're not the same book. They're actually really different. And for some reason, my screen is there. So what I think this Rijeka book is doing is trying to understand something different, not about nationalism, but about why is there less violence than I would expect. So I spent time in Rijeka before starting this book. I got to know it through living in Croatia, but also I got to know it through the Italian historiography and the European historiography, which is always about populism, charismatic politics, and the formation of a movement outside the state that the state somehow could not control. That is what Fiume is most known for, if it's known at all, outside of its local context. And so I was trying to figure out, what does that mean if you don't believe Fiume was Italian? And I keep on using this difference between talking about Rijeka and talking about Fiume, because I think Sushak is incredibly important in understanding this entire story. And so when I use Fiume, it's kind of like, and to be American, talking about Manhattan and New York City, right? So I'm trying to really use this not in terms of the Italian word for Fiume versus the Croatian word for Fiume, but more about a very circumscribed political unit that is different than today's. So it's more to try, and it's not about Istanbul, Constantinople. It's more about not including Sushak in talking about Fiume because of how important Sushak is for understanding Fiume. So again, this is not an intellectual history. This is not a history that's focused on understanding nationalism. It's about trying to understand about the position of the state in violence. Now, most historiographies until this point have answered, why is there so little? I mean, there is violence and everyone knows that, but why is there much less than what we see in the Baltics and Ukraine, in what will be Yugoslavia, Macedonia? It's been answered through charisma, has been answered through populism, has been answered through the leader and the manipulation of the media to create this sense of a movement. So, and the true sense of movement. The assumption always being, however, that the town was made up of D'Annunzio followers. And so what happens if you change who the town is? What does it mean? And this is a picture from early November 1918. If the town is the same town as before World War I, if it is made up of people from all over, if it's made up of people who speak all these languages. And, you know, it's a little scary to be talking about this stuff with some of the people here, because a lot of my work is based on their work. And I remember Vanni D'Alessio, who's here, read a draft of my manuscript, and he's like, you really need to use Ivan Jeličić's work more. You're not using it enough. And one of those points was about multilingualism. And Vanni is always right. Ivan, annoyingly always right. So what if we put this city in this way? Not just that there are lots of different nationalities, but that there are also they've been working together for a while, and the multilingualism of this is part of that. So what if this is the city and not the followers of D'Annunzio? So the central question of the book, what got me into the archives at the beginning was, if it was so ethnically diverse, why didn't it turn into a bloodbath with these creepy guys in there? I mean, this does not look like a peacekeeping force. This doesn't look like, oh, there's so little violence because they came. I look at those guys and I go, there should have been so much more violence. Look at those guys. I mean, look at what they represent, what they want to represent. And so that was the central question of the book. I think anyone who's seen me give a talk, I always show the slide because this is how I think, kind of sloppy all over the place. This is how Harvard thinks, very fancy. It's the same. It's just made fancier. And that thing that I wrote there, I think I wrote this picture that you see in 2011. This is a book that's taken forever, partially because I'm always slow, but mostly because of this, is that it was made in the archives. This is a book that didn't know how to anchor itself in the secondary sources and then just tried to start over. And poor Francesca, I am not thanking you for this. I'm using you. You sent me this great picture and made me incredibly jealous a year ago before COVID that you were in the archives and I wasn't. But Boris Zakoszek and Mladen Urem, they spent probably about 7 years following my insanity. And if you've read the book, you know that there's lots of little stories about people no one knows. There is no way to do that except with archivists who will follow every lead. For every story that's in there, there's about 300 others I tried to follow and then didn't end up using. Finding these people's information, even just figuring out someone's age, can take a week, if not two. And most of you are historians here, you know this already, but this book is not possible with not just people who, they did their job, but they did a lot more than their job. And so anyways, this book is the product of people who who gave me far more help than I should have expected. So I'm just, because we're doing this fast, the book is made up of introduction, a conclusion, and 5 chapters. Chapter 1 is, everything we're supposed to know about Fiume and why it's weird. Chapter 2 is about money. So what I really decided is what's going on here, why is there no violence, is that there is a state that's still there, even though in the Paris peace treaties, in the media and everything, the state has disappeared. It looks like we are in a nowhere's land of fighting of what land it's going to be in. But we're in desperate times and people need a state. And this is not a well-functioning state. This is not a state made up of masterminds who know how to do everything better than everybody else. But it is trying. And it's trying in lots of different ways. And the first real chapter of the book is chapter 2, which is on money, and looking about how so many different sectors of society, different people, are suffering with the dissolution of the money maker state, the dissolution of the Habsburg Empire, and what it means to live with money without a state. And it is decimating to people's lives and also their opportunities for getting food, and turns into a situation where the idea of entering a state with a somewhat stable currency, and I know we think of Italy as unstable, especially today, but compared to what was going on in the rest of the post-Habsburg lands, it was the monument of stability in the region for currency. So thinking about why Italy, not in terms of identity, but in terms of a state. The second is about law and about how, even though they claimed, the Italian National Council claimed that all they wanted to do was being Italian, what they're doing on the ground is some sneaky stuff of trying to change as much as possible to make everything look Italian, but keep as much as possible of the stuff that they like. And this is for conservative reasons, this is for power reasons, but one way or the other, what it means is on the day-to-day, Fiume doesn't feel as different as it looks in the stories we've heard before. Chapter 3 is about citizenship, who's in and out. This is really about this weird thing that Zavichainost, Heimatrecht, pertinency. I can't say the Hungarian version. Agnes is here, I think. Maybe later she can say it for us. But this idea of who has rights here, who can't be kicked out, who can get food from the rations office, who will get subsidies because the currency is out of control and their pay isn't enough, who has a right to live somewhere is something that they do have the power in this time to decide, and they do change the rules, and they change the rules in nationalist ways. There is no question that nationalism is important here. But they also don't only change it in nationalist ways. So that's what chapter 3 is about. And chapter 4. Chapter 5 is the final chapter, which I guess is about nationalism. It's really about a sense of the self, of the state, of what it's projecting itself out as, and how people are how involved are they in this projection? Is this the state pushing the people down to behave as the state wants it to, or is it also coming from below? And here I look at language, rules, laws, flags, education, and trying to really see how much is changing and how much isn't. The central argument of the book is that under a history of political nationalism, and anyone who tells you that that's not the case is that would be very fascinating. This is a time of political nationalism. There's a history of consolidation going on here, and that's what I'm seeing. And these are I think Vani's written on this. I think many people have written on the double-headed eagle. And how it becomes a one eagle. This is an important symbol, and if we think about it, it fits very well with this other thing of the Wechselstube with vogliamo annessione. It's not about getting rid of one or the other. It's almost about like keeping it going just enough, not getting rid of the eagles totally. I do think this is not about Fiume as much as it is about Fiume. I think this is about Habsburg history. I do think this is actually about post-imperial history. I think Fiume is an easy case, which sounds crazy because anyone knows anything about Rijeka would never call it easy, but it's small. It's much smaller than Poland or Yugoslavia. And those are probably, I think, the hardest of the bunch to do. So that, anyways, in a nutshell, that's what I tried to do in the book. I'm going to stop sharing now so that we can all see each other. And now the hard part begins.
Thank you so much, Dominique, for this presentation. It was very intriguing, and I think that you have already brought up a few things which are very important, such as the many layers of history, the existence of different narratives, different legacies, but also the importance of citizenship in social terms, which was key in understanding the aftermath of the First World War, and also the fact that we have to be careful in regarding nationalism as the only moving force behind events unfolding in this area of the war. So I will break the ice with a very trivial question. I would like to start from the cover of your book. I hope that you can see it. It was the last slide of Dominique's presentation. We can see two little girls. One of them is smiling at the camera. Behind them, there is a wall covered with posters exalting Gabriele D'Annunzio. There is written "Long Live Gabriele D'Annunzio," and also it features slogans such as "Fiume" or "Death." So there is a sharp contrast between this aggressive nationalist propaganda and ordinary people. But we have another visual element, which is at the top left, an advertisement of the Puntigam beer, an Austrian beer, which reminds us of the Habsburg, post-Habsburg commercial networks connecting the city of Fiume, Rijeka with the rest of the empire. And it lead us to the fact that these networks did not disappear all of a sudden after 1918. So already in the cover of your book, you have three very different points that you develop throughout the chapters. You have the Nunzio story, which made the first pages of the international press. Then you have the story of ordinary people who lived in Rijeka, and also the economic context in which this story unfolds. And I would add that you are using sources which are not entirely fresh, in the sense they have already been used by other historians, at least some of them, but you come up with a completely different story, which is the story of ordinary people behind proclaims and behind rhetorics. And this led me to a set of questions. I would start with the first one, coming back to these little girls. So what do these little girls see around in Fiume Rijeka, and why what they see is so different from many readers would expect them to see? And the side question would be, how is it possible to read the sources differently in order to make the voices of ordinary people heard? And what does this story of subaltern strata tell us?
I'm just gonna just share the screen for 1 second because I want to show the picture as a whole. The girls are impossible to not see. It's just something so scary to see Italy or death with a generation of children. It's just so gross, the idea of that our politics are more important than our future. But then look here, see this? I think that's D'Annunzio. I think that bald head there under who hurts Fiume dies by Fiume's hand. I'm sorry, there's such seriousness in the political history of Fiume that it gives very little oxygen to the lived experience of something that lasted a really long time. And it just think of you've gone through war in which, you basically have a military state taking over, and rations office, and the harbors are empty except for soldiers and shipments for soldiers. So not as many people are making money as would like to be. And then you have this, where all these other soldiers are coming in, and then you have D'Annunzio, and everything is about where do we belong, what state are we in, we want this, we want that. And they're just, in this history, why are we assuming that human beings was just so much more serious and committed to politics in this very ideological way, in a moment where there were lots of pressures to just figure out how to keep on going? So to answer your questions, this book took forever because of how it was written as much as what was being used. How do you put in people who you never get to read their diaries or all their letters, like I did with the first book? I didn't have any way to really do a mentality history, because the paper trails of mentality were so geared to ideology. The newspapers, I avoided them like nobody's business because of how untrustworthy they are. Yet they are constantly claiming a mentality state. If you read not just Vedetta, but also Primorska, and also Bilancia, they're constantly filled with the tropes of the everyday Fiumean, and trying to create this vision of what we are and what we need and what we're living. And sometimes it might be true, but I can't tell. And so how I approached using the sources and approach trying to get outside of histories that were produced to create precisely these kind of highly politicized ideological visions was to look at how much could you get from your world and how hard was it to get it. There are examples in the police files throughout, which I didn't even use that much, of people going, enough of this masquerade. And so thinking about Francesca's question of what did these kids see, it's really hard. I mean, when I was 6 years old, I remember crying because Reagan won the elections. Why did I think Reagan winning the elections should make me cry? I mean, clearly my parents had trained me very well to think this was the end of the world. So what a child thinks about the world they're seeing is a difficult one. We have novelists and we have diaries where we see a child interact with the world around them, trying to make sense of it and trying to see beyond what they're getting told. But a child's vision is also getting produced through what their parents think, what their state thinks, what their teachers think. So those two kids, and I love that you emphasized, Francesca, that one of them is smiling. It's funny that they're not looking at that sign, Italy or death, with fear, right? They look, so I don't know what those kids think. And I don't know a lot of what the majority of the people in my book are thinking. What I do know is how they're getting placed in a system and moved around in ways we have been trained to not expect. I don't know if that answers your question. It's
yes,
quiet.
I think you did it. I will now pass it over to Ivan for the next question.
Yeah, thank you very much, Francesca. And thank you, Dominique, for being here with us, because I also know that we had to convince you to be part of this Zoom because you don't like Zoom, and I completely agree. I mean, it will be very much happier when we'll be able to do this stuff live here in Rijeka and in other parts of the Upper Adriatic, I hope so. Before I frame actually my question, I wanted to, start, I would say, from the beginning. I mean, I would try to say why this book is important. Not why only this book is important for locals, but why this book is important, I would say, in a larger post-Habsburg space, or whoever is dealing with Habsburg history, post-Habsburg history. So Fiume Rijeka has been generally addressed by Italian and Croatian Yugoslav historiography, with the, I would say, notable exception of Michael Eden. He's probably one among the few non-Croatian Italian Yugoslav scholars who has been writing about Fiume. Also, and I see here a few Hungarian colleagues, Angela and Agnes. I mean, definitely there is also the Hungarian approach, but I would say it's minor compared to these approaches, but maybe you can also say something about it later. But more or less, I would say that, so the approach of these various researchers' works could be divided in 4 different categories or 4 different approaches. The first one would be a localist perspective, so why Fiume Rijeka is important for its inhabitants. National perspective, so why Fiume Rijeka is to be included in the national history of Italy and the national history of Croatia or Yugoslavia, depending on the period. Fascism, nationalism studies topic, so Fiume and D'Annunzio's episode as an important or crucial stage for the development of Italian fascism. And finally, so as a revolutionary vanguard laboratory, so looking from the perspective of some D'Annunzio's followers and their political artistical visions. What was missing from these stories were the locals, so ordinary people with a name and surname of different gender, of various social background, that used multiple languages or dialects, and that were not simply an indistinct Croatian or Italian mob carrying national flags. Obviously, I would say another blind spot, was the Habsburg or post-Habsburg context in Fiume Rijeka, treated and seen through national lens, as if it's social, economical, administrative, architectural, I mean, you name it, structure. Not to say, I would say also cities' mere existence and development were not directly linked to this Habsburg past. So something which is not yet a past, I would say, again, important in the book. It's not a former era in October, November 1918, and you pointed it very well in the presentation. And it was neither a past at the end of 1920. So simply because of this, because these topics you addressed, this book is already a reference point, a pillar for everyone who is studying Fiume and will be doing it in the future. I would say this is definitely something that this book is, I mean, really worthy for everyone from all different perspectives. However, I think besides this Fiume Rijeka perspective, you made your argument larger. Fiume's story has not only to be retold from the Habsburg and ordinary people perspective and consolidate a new narrative for city's history, but it's a part of a larger transition story that has to be readdressed. So 1918 is not a story of only a story of triumphant homogenizing nation states. It's also a story of patchwork, of cutting, sometimes copying and pasting of laws, symbols, administrations, etc., by new states or those who claim to have state power in order to make everyday life function. So my question in this sense would be, how much this Fiume story is different or similar to other cities of post-World I disappeared empires? Is Fiume really special, or some of these patterns are similar to other cities? And what type of cities? Middle-sized cities, larger cities, future capital cities, only Habsburg cities, or also former Russian Empire and Ottoman Empire cities? So this would be basically my question. How much can we learn from Fiume to think about transition for cities in also other parts of the post-imperial, the alleged post-imperial world?
Well, I mean, Vani always says this, God damn it, Ivan. Can't you just do easier questions? I did not write an urban history. I wrote a state history. Fiume is a city-state. If this had been about a city, it would have been written completely differently. Anyone who doesn't know Fiume, if they show up in Rijeka, will have no idea where they are. There is absolutely no sense of space. There is absolutely no sense of the different neighborhoods. You wouldn't really know how to walk in the town after having read my book. A good urban history, even if it's about a city that's been bombed during World War II, as Rijeka was, would give you a feeling of the city. And I did not try to do that. I intentionally didn't do that. I tried so, you know how hard it is to not write about Fiume as Fiume? Because I thought of it as the smallest successor state, not as a city. So in that way, already Fiume is completely a unicorn. Well, maybe unicorn's not right because it actually did exist, but it's the four-leaf clover of the smallest space that is a state. And there's so much interesting work going on Czechoslovakia and on Yugoslavia and on Poland about the different cities making the different states. So these expectations of what the state can be based on what the capital cities are kind of imposing on the hinterland and the greater geographies. So I see Yene is here. Is Slovenia a Ljubljana project or is it a provincial project? And how much of looking at that differently is something else? Is Czechoslovakia Prague expanded, or is a Slovakian provincial identity, legal identity, economic identity actually utilized and incorporated in the state that comes? These are issues that are not easily answered, and they are, I think they are heavily contested during the time period. And let's not even talk about Poland or Yugoslavia. So in that way, Fiume maybe is similar. And you already gave me that little thing about capital cities. Maybe Fiume is similar. But I do think that all the problems that the state of Fiume, not the city of Fiume, the state of Fiume is dealing with and how they're dealing with it is not strange compared to all the other new successor states. So what do you do with money? Who is a citizen? What is a law? What is education? Who are we? I think those questions on a state level are being confronted and compromised, patchworked, as you said, in very similar ways as the Fiume story. So in that way, I see it as emblematic, but I don't see it. And then going to your question about Ottoman, and I would add German, by the way. I think that I do not understand how the world forgot that Germany was an empire, not because of what it was doing in Africa, but because it was doing in Germany. There are many kings. It's an emperor because there are also other kings, Bayern, whatever. So, thinking about what's happening in all of these places after the war are strangely keeping a lot of the old stuff instead of starting from scratch. Even though we have this vision of suffrage for women and a lot does change, but a lot doesn't. I don't know if that answered your question.
Well, I mean, I would say you definitely did in a certain way. I mean, it's definitely not easy to answer this kind of question.
Oh, I thought you were a friend.
I'll pass, I think, the word to Natka. Natka is now the one with the next question.
Thank you, Ivan. So thank you, Dominique, for introducing so well your books and for putting it so clearly. And Francesca and Ivan also stressed this aspect of your book of not being a book about nationalism. And when you said about diaries, I just remembered when Zora Blažić in her diary said, "I'm fed up with all these stories. I just want to marry." So this is really, I think, the most groundbreaking thing in your approach. For me, the most inspiring sentence in your book is from the very last page, when you say, "Nothing was inevitable." So you manage to avoid the understanding of nationalism as an inevitable path towards totalitarianism and the political violence of the 20th century. And in this regard, I'm not a historian, so my question will be slightly different and more from a literary or anthropological point of view. And I don't see your book so much as a study on imperial historical legacy, which it is, of course, but also as a very useful, we could say useful knowledge, useful insight into our most urgent current concerns. And in this sense, for me, it's also a discourse of hope. From this point of view, your book is, for me, similar to some other studies and researches on other multinational and multicultural political structures, for example, Yugoslavia. And there are many books on Yugoslavia, on the dissolution of Yugoslavia, that say that it did not fail just because of nationalism, that it could have happened differently. And when Andrew Baruch Wachtel, I don't know if you know his book from 1908, when he wrote about Yugoslav, the history of Yugoslavia idea, he ended the book in a way that surprised me a lot at the time. He said, "We Americans should learn about the dissolution of Yugoslavia in order to prevent it from happening in the USA." And this is how he explained it. He said, identity policies brought forward by minority groups, and he means particular claims that replaced the idea of melting pot, which is he is very fond of. So these identity policies can provoke arrogance, aggressivity, and separatism of the majority. And read today, these words, for me at least, sound really prophetic. And it's not just a dream about Austria Felix or a Yugo-nostalgia, which, by the way, is quite similar to Habsburg myth. It's also very importantly about finding a key for the European Union, or we can say also not to mention Bosnia and Herzegovina and so on. So my question is, if you, similarly to Wachtel, think that today's America can learn something from the Austro-Hungarian monarchy and its demise.
Well, I mean, we're in a different world. It's 100 years later. But I think that this, and you know, my president keeps on getting impeached. I'm in Italy right now. The problem that I have with identity politics is so often it gets rid of what a lot of politics is about, is administration. And states are not only about you know, the Hollywood movie where you want the state to look like the hero you wish you were, which I think is a lot of what the rhetoric around you know, what America is dealing with right now and what most of the world is dealing with right now, is thinking about identity politics as the maker and the breaker of states. And I really wonder how true that is. I wonder if that's the banner of how anger is or happiness is expressed. I do really think that human beings like to have a home, like to eat, like to not worry, you know, like to. I really do think, especially Americans, always want to think they're going to be rich. So. Do I think my history is important for Americans? I do. I mean, I wrote it because I think it is important. I think that we all need to start paying a lot more attention to what our needs are and how we think we might meet them. And then how this idea of how they could get met gets manipulated and utilized for different political goals, right? So in the chapter on money, it's about telling people over and over, once we get annexation, you'll have a stable salary, right? That is a political manipulation around currency. And it's being done for a political goal. Now, perhaps they were right, they weren't, but perhaps they were right. Doesn't matter. What matters is they were being told our problems can be solved with political nationalism. But the problems were not political nationalism. The problems were, we don't have the state making the money. We have no secure for what we're doing right now. So I don't know if this is answering, but I think it's very difficult to make boring stuff like how states work interesting to read. And I think that is a big problem. It's a problem, not just in terms of history, it's a problem of living in states, is that we tend to not pay attention to the stuff that actually matters more. And we're looking at the guy with the Viking hat in the Capitol. Instead of the crazy guy dressed up like a Navy SEAL who's ready to kill people around stealing the ballots. So, and it's the ballots, that's why they did it that day. So I don't know if I'm all over the place, but I do think it's important to slow down and start looking at the where, when, and why of why all of this political nationalism is happening. Instead of assuming that it's being fed from natural needs of communities.
Thank you. This is really a different point of view. Yes, we tend to see identity policies as a major question, of course.
Right. I mean, it is, and that's why it works so well, because people care about their identity. It's not like it's not all a fabrication, but it's also much more important when you're in a pressure point and other needs are not getting met. And then you start questioning, why aren't they getting met? Maybe because people don't see me.
Thank you. I'll give floor to Francesca for the next question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Natka. Since we have people following us who are not maybe that much into post-Habsburg studies, I will just, yeah.
I mean, how is that possible?
There are such people. So I will just emphasize the fact that your research is not isolated, but it is positioned within a historiographical strand, which stresses continuities in the post-imperial spaces and tries to debunk the interpretation of this history as completely shaped by nation-related issues. I think that in your book, you stress a very thought-provoking argument, which is the fact that Fiume, rather than being a shatter zone of different nationalisms, rather desperately tries to maintain some imperial infrastructures and hopes that Italy, which was the state which defeated Austria-Hungary, would provide some kind of similar imperial umbrella. I'm not sure it applies here, but somehow it reminds me of a very popular sentence from the Italian novel Il Gattopardo, cambiare tutto perché niente cambi, to change everything so that nothing will change. And you, in your book, you analyze the time span from 1918 to 1921 as a time of continuity rather than a time of rupture. And you argue that Fiume was able to undermine the Paris peace negotiations, not because of its tense situation, but on the contrary, because despite the siege, despite the occupation, the city kept functioning and the crisis did not degenerate into a bloodbath as happened in other cities. So my question would be, if we extend a little bit the time span and we cover a few more years, we see that Fiume went through a period of more widespread violence and chaos. And in that period, the city worked less smoothly than before, which of course cannot be compared with the Polish or the Baltic context, but I see a process starting in 1921, which was also the year of the rise of squadrismo in Italy, and we know that fascist squads from Italy played a role in preventing the city, preventing Fiume to function in 1921, and in the coup d'etat, which happened in 1922, which paved the annexation to Italy. So my question would be, what happened on the long run? So did the city succeed in preserving a kind of imperial framework? And what was the position of the city in that new fascist empire? Let's call it like that.
So I initially thought I would be writing until 1924. So I did start the research doing the whole period. And I'm constantly trying to figure out how to finish stuff because it's impossible. And I realized that the story isn't one, that once the international agreement around Fiume becoming an independent city-state is made, it's not the same story. I see 1918 to 1921 as a push on the ground to affect the international situation against independence, out of enormous fear of how the city could keep being the same without having a state that's an umbrella state. And once it's clear it's not going to get that umbrella state, how things work and what people are pushing for changes a lot. And I also think that the exhaustion after 3 years of this and the poverty that is now just getting stronger and stronger, and the exhaustion on both of the other sides too, of everything surrounding Fiume. And as you bring up the Biennio Rosso and the Squadrismo, but also in SHS, what's happening is one could call it more extremism, one could call it a hardening of lines, but also within the city itself, trying to find options to solve different problems than what the problems are between 1918 and 1921. I would love for some of these people here to write that history. And I know that Ivan's already working on it. And I know, Francesca, you're working on it. And I know that there's some other people here that are working on it. And it's a history that I really hope does not get told only as a political history, the 1921 to 1924, because I don't think that anyone knows what they're doing in 1921. And I think that, and what happened so quickly, I mean, 1922, it just happens all very fast, is partially because things are getting desperate. So to try and answer your question, Francesca, which is an impossible one to answer, especially because I decided not to do it, it's not in my book, is I think that it is a different history, and especially after 1924, this is not the same story. They do not keep, they keep a memory of it, and they keep a vision of where did their wealth come from and how did Fiume boom. They see it as imperial, but the power to determine their terms and how that imperial relationship will be made, and Italy is an empire in the 20s and 30s. There's fascist Italy is imperial, and Fiume is part of that project. It is not the same kind of empire as the one they had been fighting to keep under Hungary. One of the things I tried to show in the book is these guys are pretty good at trying to push what they want, because they've been pushing against Hungary now for a couple of decades as well. And so that this is a longer history of trying to keep quote unquote autonomy and not get eaten up. But once they're in Italy, not on their own terms, I don't see a lot of that autonomy being the major story. I see the memory of that autonomy being a major story. So I stopped in 21 because, again, I wasn't writing a history of Fiume for Fiume. I was trying to talk about imperial transition and post-empire. And I think that Fiume's history changes so much with, I mean, it's an independent city-state of less than 50,000 people. This is not normal. So it just didn't seem, it seemed fascinating for talking about the history of this place, but it didn't seem very representative of what's happening in the post-World War I world, where most places are trying to get independence.
Yeah, thank you, Dominique. I think that I was asking a question that a colleague shouldn't ask.
No, yeah, well, I mean,
to expand.
You know, this is a gang of thieves here. You guys are all, the questions are not easy.
I'm kidding. To expand the focus, because usually the right suggestion or question is to narrow down the focus. So no, I think that you brought up some issues which we will come back to, such as continuity and comparisons and terms of comparisons. So Ivan, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Francesca. So talking about questions one shouldn't ask. So no, I'm basically building up on Francesca's argument about this importance of Italy, but the perspective would be through the lens of the local elite. So I would say that one of the crucial questions that emerges from this book is the role of this local elite. Understood, and I'm quoting, this is also a term basically we have been using in our ERC Nepostrans project as a guideline. How do we define elite? As a group of powerful people who hold this appropriate amount of wealth, privilege, political power, or skill in a society. So I think that you made clear in the book that there were these influential figures around and part of the Italian National Council that pursued policies with the attempt of keeping the situation calm, keeping the order, building and maintaining consent with economic and social policies. This elite has been generally labeled as an Italian nationalistic elite, but this adjective, and I think you pointed really well, does not say much or let's say obscures an important point. How much of these figures were keen, most of all, on maintaining and building up on their pre-Habsburg position. So maintaining their social and most of all economic wealth by using annexation and Italian nationalism simply as a tool, I would say a convenient facade. A sub-question somehow would be, and you can also say maybe something more about it, why Italian nationalism? I mean, is Italy better equipped of Yugoslavia? Is Italy seen as an empire and Yugoslavia is not seen as an empire? Is there also a case of Italian cultural and linguistic hegemony inside this local elite? Are there traces of anti-Slavic economical, cultural prejudices inside this elite? To put it simply, these local actors don't want to be simply annexed to Italy, as you said previously, became another Italian city. They want to preserve their special economic status inside the larger region, but now with the empire gone, transplant, adjust this position to Italy. So is your book also a partially untold story of a struggle and perseverance of this elite to maintain empire's economic network at the local level? Generally, could you say something more about the source of the economic wealth of some of these figures and how it transformed or didn't during this time frame transition? Again, I'm not asking.
Oh my God, I am so glad I have witnesses to the cruelty of the questions that I am getting. Like, I'm glad this is recorded. This is on record. That these are my friends. I'm going to share the screen for a second. So I was, thinking about this question, and I want to go back to what Natka was sweet enough to say is nothing was predetermined, but also no one knew what the hell they were doing. How much Fiumians really knew what Italy was is important. And this is from June, the Biblioteca Civica. This is from June 1919. It's a list of the books they just bought. And buying books in June 1919 and having them sent to Fiume with all the blockades and the currency problems, that's an investment. So if you know Italian, what do you see here? What are these books about? They're about industry and economy. They are about what is the post-war going to be. They're about syndicalism and the problems of rights of workers. They're about the fall of the Habsburg Empire and the German Empire, what the future states are going to be. They are our colonial peace. They are the crisis of the post-war. They are the inheritors of the successor states. And they are about empire. They are about Italian empire. What's the second document? The second document is from April 1920, and it's about translating Fiume's legal codes into Italian so that they will be legible and will have to be taken into account. These are created by elites. These two documents, those state documents, are not state documents. These are initiatives by men who are trying to beat systems. They are trying to figure out what the strategy is of Italian empire, because they don't know it. And they are trying to stack the deck, the American idiom. They're trying to, at the casino, make sure the ball goes in their favor. I have not done the work that some of the people on this Zoom call have of really going in deep to the elites. I thought I was going to do that. I started that way because from the last book, I thought, oh, I'll do the families. And then I realized I wanted to do a different kind of book. I wanted to do not the power monglers, but what power does. But there's no way to understand what power does without looking at what the power monglers are setting up. So I don't know. I can't answer your question, Ivan, because I didn't do that kind of research. But I can see what cards were being given, and they were about going back to the Gatto Pardo quote of changing nothing. And they were about empire and economy. This was all about controlling the economy and linking it to empire. And should this even be surprising? I'm not so sure. This is a port city that is, as some of the people working on Hungary now are showing, was really seeing its future in export and import on a global market. Gabo is doing all this great new work, but there's been a lot of good work by Hungarian historiography on the economic goals of the Hungarian state before World War I. And I think Fiume was, definitely not a passive player in that game. And the more I'm studying LaGuardia, the more I'm seeing it even more. So I cannot answer your question about the local elites. You're the one that's going to answer that question, and I want that book. But I do think that I don't see that much anti-Slavism. I see a lot of capitalism. And it would be a little weird to think that SHS is a better capitalist bet than Italy in 1919. Let's think what happened during World War I in the lands that would become SHS. This is not for an export-import port city. This is not. Fiume saw itself as or at least its elites played itself to Italian politicians as the handmaiden of Balkan imperialism. But anyways.
No, thank you very much. Actually, even you, this is, I think, an important point. You intentionally didn't want to work, I would say, or you decided not to work on the elite. But I think that the book is full, actually, of this kind of elements that tell us something about this elite.
Right.
And I would say this is really important.
They are running the state. This is not some kind of cross-class democracy.
Right, right. I think this is really, really a crucial point. In understanding also this process of transition and understanding how much 1918 is or isn't a rupture in the historical context. Yeah. I'll pass the ball to Natka.
Oh God, guys, the next one's even harder.
Sorry, this will be our last question, then we will leave the floor to the audience. I will start from what you have just said, that you don't see so much anti-Slavism, but much more capitalism. And I will link my question to this, your statement. I think you, tell me if I'm wrong, but I see very much of the category of national indifference in your book. With a certain understatement, you never declare about it, but I think it is as it is also the subject of your previous book, and you use it in the frame of the new Habsburg Studies, and I think you have showed convincingly that Rijeka is a very suitable case study for testing this very category. You say that humans chose to be next to Italy out of interest and not out of their Italian nationalist fervor. So they had a kind of fluid identity. A positive and politically organized movement of this local non-identity was organized only by the autonomists and without success. But your book is not about, or is not only about the autonomists, it's primarily about those who, even though they were not fervent Italians, chose Italy as a better solution for the prosperity of their city for the reason that Ivan just said. To put my question, I will use two examples from your book, two characters which I love most. I love many of them in your portrait gallery, but these two are particularly inspiring for me. One is the school principal Maria Voncina. Let me pronounce it like I'm used to say Voncina. And the other is the 20-year-old clerk, Francesco Pospek. For those who have not read the book yet, I'll just say briefly that Maria Voncina is the principal of the school in Place, in the outskirts of Rijeka, a very dedicated pedagogue, a lover of Italian language and culture, a moderate nationalist, we could say, and her pupils are mostly Croatian. And she educates them with love and respect, introducing them to Italian language and culture. So what she does actually is a very gentle form of cultural imperialism. But she has problems. She has problems with some of the representatives of the government who are extreme Italian nationalists, and according to them, she is not sufficiently nationalist. And my other favorite character is Francesco Pospek, who is 20 years old and is a troublemaker in a fight in a cafe between Italian and French soldiers. She stood for French soldiers, and then when she went out from the cafe, when he went out, he was assaulted by two Italians who obviously were not nationally indifferent. So, and when the policeman arrived, Pospek declared himself as a convinced and fervent Croat, and got arrested and charged with inciting hatred among the nationalities. So I'm thinking about these two cases in the light of your thesis. Voncina fits your thesis perfectly. She belongs to the pro-Italian current, but she is not interested in politics, and the guardians of the nation consider her as nationally indifferent. But I wonder if those who preferred Italian culture could be different. Was it the same for those who didn't? Could those who wanted to keep Croatian language and culture be indifferent, moderate individuals, and what is most important for me, not linked in or organized into political groups? Because here we are talking about the question of political agency of an individual which has a non-identity, a negative identity. So where is the possibility of political agency here? Because if we look through these two examples, it seems that those who opted for the dominant political position could afford to be cosmopolitan, tolerant, and moderate, while those who resisted dominant politics and put forward minority instances had to rely on some kind of firm or not fluid identity or even essential ethnicity. From my point of view, this is actually the question of the difference between post-colonial theory and post-colonial praxis, while post-colonial theory tends to glorify hybrid subjects, post-colonial praxis often testifies fervent nationalism of the subaltern. So you see, I have no answer to this question. It bothers me very much. And I would name it that this is a question of the so-called imperial cosmopolitanism. So if you can help me to solve this, this puzzle, thank you.
Oh, wow. I've been afraid of this question. I knew it was coming. First, I've never understood why people think I'm part of this national indifference thing. My first book is about nationalists. It's about people who are obsessed with the idea of nation. They think the solution is nation. So, yeah, my first book is not about national indifference at all. It's about the opposite. But why do people keep on thinking my work is, Natka, what you've said is, it's not what I am always put in that camp. It is, Christopher Clark, I don't know if anyone was at the talk last month, literally said, you are famous for national indifference. And I was like, how am I famous for national indifference? And I know why people think that. It's because I don't think nationalism is natural. I don't think that people are born and necessarily are, I think that indifference is a possible category. So I see that there are choices, there are changes, and there's activism. But neither my first book is about indifference. It's actually about choice. It's about difference. And then I don't think this book is about national indifference either. It's actually about, this is a history of political nationalism. But what goes wrong if you just look at political nationalism? What doesn't make sense? If political nationalism explains everything, why isn't Fiume Italianissima? So other stuff is going on here, not just. So I mean, anyone who puts me in a room with Tara Zara deserves all of my gratitude. The woman is brilliant. I love her work. I also think she's nice. Put me in her room. I'm fine with that. But I don't think that I care about indifference. I care about choices. And I care about how nationalism is a choice, and how you do it depends on your context and your goals. So Voncina is not indifferent to me. She is a total nationalist. Like, she is writing letters. She might not be mean. She might not be, let's kill or kick out everybody who's not Italian. She's not an ethnic nationalist. She's a cultural nationalist. As you said, she's a slow nationalist. She's a hegemonic cultural nationalist, but she is a nationalist. She is not indifferent. She believes that Italian nationalism is the best thing she can give to her students. And Francesco Posbeck he's a member of the Serb-Croat Slovene National Council. But even more important, and that's weird. I mean, he's so proud of it. He's carrying it in his wallet when he gets arrested. Not only that, he's not Croatian, he's Slovene. But he's so committed to this. He's a Yugoslav. He's not a Croatian or a Slovene. He believes in a Yugoslav idea. He goes to Sušak for school. His father is Slovene. He was actually born, I don't know if Ivan remembers this, but he helped me find the birth certificate because he was born illegitimately. And we spent, Boris, Ivan, and I in the room trying to find this guy to figure out if he actually did have pertinency or not, or if it was a lie. Doesn't matter. The point is that I want to answer your other question because I find that very interesting. Not after my little mission statement of, I don't know, I'm indeterminate about where I sit in indeterminacy. But the question of, can you be soft if you're not pro-Italian, right? So can you not be punching people in the streets, but slowly guiding them between nationalisms or between ethnicities. And I have two examples to answer your question. I do think we need to get rid of this idea of post-war, immediate post-war Fiume as between Italians and Croatians. I think that there are over 10% people who are mother tongue Hungarian speakers, and they have an even worse time in post-war Fiume than Croats do. If you're thinking about where is their identity in this whole story, Germans, Slovenes, and betwixt and between. This is a city that has grown over 60% in 20 years. People moving to Fiume are not doing it because they want to go to the motherland of their nation. They are going there for jobs. If they really, really are going there for jobs that they don't want to live in an Italian climate, they can live in Sushak and just walk across the bridge. That's why it's so important to remember that Sushak is there. If you don't speak Italian, you can live and work in Fiume in a city where the laws are in Croatian. You can send your children, even if you live in Fiume, to the school in Sushak. Even in the post-war, they're still sending their kids to the school in Sushak. So there is a way to be part of the Fiume story, to live the Fiume story, and not know a word of Italian. And that's true after 1918 too. It's harder, and it has a lot to do with power. So the two people I want to talk about is the head of the trams. His name, I always forget it. So 1 second, I'm just going to look it up. He's a Croatian nationalist. His name is Dragutin Jeličić. He sends his kids to school in Sushak. He's the head of the Fiume tram system, and he gets there's a police case taken against him by some Italian tram controllers that want him kicked out, calling him an evil Croatian nationalist who is using his power against Italians, and this cannot exist in Fiume. So they interview all of the people working for the tram system, and some of them say, yes, he only talks, he's only nice to people who speak to him in Croatian. He's constantly wearing the Croatian tricolor thing on his lapel. This is bad for Fiume. He needs to get kicked out. Then there's a lot of other people who say, no, he's just, he's never been a nice guy. That's why he's the controller. He's not nice to the Croatians either. And in the end, the Fiume state, and this is before D'Annunzio, decides that the case is just some Italian trying to get his job. So why does this story matter? It matters because Jeličić has power. He's a Croatian nationalist. He's put in a very uncomfortable position because he's a Croatian nationalist, but then he's found right because he's powerful. So, if we just look at it in terms of identity of, can you be cosmopolitan if you're Croatian in Fiume? Well, depends. How powerful or unpowerful are you? It's probably the worst in the middle. Probably if no one cares who you are, no one's listening to you anyways, or if you're very, very powerful, you have friends. The other story, which is in the book, is about Macolage, whose family becomes very famous in Fiume history because of talking about the Holocaust. And what's the name of that book again, Ivan? Storia...
Ci sarebbe bastato.
So anyways, Michael Lago, a baker from today's Ukraine, Poland, basically fires all of his workers who speak Croatian so that the Fiume powers that be don't get him into trouble for not being Italian. So the pressure of proving yourself loyal can create nationalist evil far beyond what people's own ethnicities are in order to play up to the state. And so going back to your question, Natka, I totally agree with you. It's much easier to, using Vani's term, float, surf the waves when the identity that people are giving you and the one that you can play the easiest is the one that's in power. However, I don't think the Fiume story is very useful to look at in terms of these kind of deep ethnic, constantly there divides that make it easier to be soft rather than hard. mostly because this is a city of newcomers, in which the divisions, and going back to Ivan's work, of the multilingualism that allows enormous possibilities of switching sides or enormous paper trails of playing all the sides, or enormous paper trails of living together. Not in a cosmopolitan way of thinking that this is the utopia and we're all one, but more of we're all here for the same thing. Can I have a job, please? I do realize, however, I've already gotten my first hate mail from Italians, so that it hurts to have histories erased. And they're going back to Ivan and Francesca's questions about what happens after. This is a moment. It doesn't stay this way. Things get rigid and things become less possible. And saying that you switch around and all that stuff as time keeps on going. And so projecting a vision of Fiume this way, I think is very dangerous, and I feel nervous about it because it's just 3 years and now it's going to be some emblem of what Fiume is. I don't think that it is anymore that story that I told about 100 years ago. And I don't think it's actually very reflective of what happened 3 years later or 10 years later or 30 years later. And we all know where things keep on going. What the Fiume Crisis, the book I read the book. The book I wrote is trying to show that it wasn't always like this. But that I'm a little worried of people then using this as this new multicultural Rijeka thing without the multiculturalism actually being there, without the choices being there. There's nothing natural about this multicultural Rijeka. It's a choice. I don't know. Annie has a question. Oh God, I
try to simplify things. No, I understand that things are much more complicated, and in this capillary way you are studying the history of those 2 years, it becomes more and more important to all of us in the light of my first question. So
yeah, no.
Really something very, very connected to our current questions.
Well, and Trieste, I mean, these places need to be compared too, of how similar and different their histories are.
Of course, that will be your next book.
LaGuardia.
After Guardia. Shall we leave the floor to the audience? Francesca, what do you say?
So thank you very much, Dominique, Ivan, and Natka for raising these questions. I think that some of them are very important beyond this peculiar microcosm, such as loyalty, class, or mobility. I think that you really raised very universal questions. So now it's time to open the floor for questions. I think we can go a bit over time, if you agree. Let's say 1 more half an hour or so. And we already have 2 questions, one by Vanni D'Alessio and the other by Renato Muscardin. And I would suggest the other participants, if they would like to ask a question, either to raise their hands virtually or type the question in the chat box. Vanni, would you like
Yes. Do you hear me? I guess, yes. Okay. One little comment about multicultural Rijeka. I also hate the way it's been used sometimes. At the same time, it's a choice, and it's a better choice than other choices, you know. It's a little hypocrite, but you know, it's a nice choice. Why not? I mean, now I'm trying to help a Colombian called Milica, which is called Milica, which has Croatian ancestry, and she does not know Croatian and Italian to come to live. She decided to go to live in Croatia. She came to Rijeka because she has a relative here. And at the end, she thought, I'm going to enlist in the Italian school. And at the beginning, as a part of a minority, I would say, why? She come to go to Croatia, not to Italian Croatia. She's not from here. She's even from Dalmatia somewhere originally. But at the end, you know, why not? It's a choice. And it's also that a little bit of how multicultural this town is. And actually, the way actually people came to Rijeka once, right? They didn't come just because they had to come as a nationalist choice, of course, and you know, why not? Anyway, that's a long story. Another small comment is about autonomy and how blind these people were. In, you know, if it's a nice thing that Francesca and then Dominique also were discussing about this imperial umbrella that these people wanted to keep, or how much they wanted to keep, and how blind they were in choosing Italy. But in this, maybe I think it's a good book to read for who, I mean, I guess everybody maybe know about it, but anyway, I just wish that Elio Apich, who wrote this Italia, Fascismo e Antifascismo nella Venezia Giulia, that, I mean, it's possible to make a book about Trieste, and it's possible to make a book about Fiume without knowing Italian, well, without knowing Croatian. You know, it is possible. People do it all the time. I can do a book about Singapore, I guess. But at the same time, I really wish Apich had did book about Rijeka than other Trieste historians who don't know Croatian. And this is a second comment. This doesn't apply to Dominique, which is, you know, about all these American historians make you feel so uncomfortable because they know everything. They so many languages and, you know, whatever. My real question is this, and and you can be very short. You don't have to be long. You know, other people want to say something. Once the question is how much locals used the international fame. I know this is one argument you had from the beginning, because I remember following your paths through the research, and you had this idea already very early about, I mean, it is important to have the fame. It's important to have the New York Times talking about you, because this means food. This means this attention gives a lot of help. So you don't have to go back to all the thing, and it's also the book there. At the same time, I just wanted to ask, since this was one of your early arguments, and how this changed through all this period of, you know, research, but basically writing, this idea of how the locals use international Fiume and how actually at the end it was good for them.
Oh, well, first there was a meeting a week ago or something about amongst American historians of Italy, and talking about the future of the field. And at some point, someone brought up Mediterranean, and that this is the answer for Italian history. And I was very uncomfortable because I really worry about Italian historiography taking on the Mediterranean, because so often they don't learn other languages. And I feel much more comfortable with people in the Eastern Mediterranean taking on the Mediterranean, because they tend to learn more languages. And so we avoid the Mare Nostrum. We avoid, when you only have sources that are written in Italian, very quickly, that Mediterranean looks very different. Now, I'm not a positivist. I'm not saying take 6 languages and all of a sudden the history is better. But I do think there's a higher chance that you're going to get out of some trip ups if you're not just hearing it from this this one thing. So I hope in the future, and I've been kind of tough on some graduate students lately who want to work on this region who don't have Slovene or Croatian, because I really worry about what the history of Trieste, Istria, Rijeka, Dalmatia is without the other historiographies, regardless of what the primary sources are in. And you know, many people here know my Croatian, so it's not like, hey, I'm the, you know, the Rosetta Stone. That. How important is the international? It's absolutely everything. It's constant. And it doesn't end in 1921. And it really is about, why is Fiume different? It's because it really sees itself as a global port city, and that's why it's making money. And so how they're trying to manipulate the press isn't even necessarily about the importance of media in the 1920s and yellow journalism, though that is definitely part of it. It's also that they've always, at least in the last 20 years before 1919, have been very aware that their futures were international and global. And we know what happens to the oil refineries, and we know what happens to a lot of these companies after 1919. And in some ways, maybe we need to think of it less about politics and more about what is our value and our worth, and who's our owners and who's our investors. So the international, it is ever present, and it keeps on going. After 1921, I'm working on LaGuardia now, and I sent this to Ivan. Like, LaGuardia was the Free State of Fiume's first international representative in New York City. I mean, what are they doing? It's hilarious. So you know, it is ever present. It has, if anything, I should have played it up more.
Thank you, Vani, for your question, and Dominique. I think that now we have a question by Renato. Renato, would you like to step in?
I think you're on mute.
Can we see you?
Yeah. Maybe he's gone away.
Okay, yeah. So we have the next question by Igor. Igor, would you like to ask the question yourself?
Hi, everybody. The question is in the chat.
Oh, no, he always has tough questions.
It's just a general one, but the talk is great. I'm enjoying it a lot. Congratulations.
The question is on the text and on the chat.
Oh, it is? Can you say it?
Yeah, I'll just read it out loud then.
Okay.
So I'm asking, since the economic interests and economic background in the period is so important, can we expect a Marxist analysis of the Fiume crisis from some political historian in the future? I guess you're already shifting that perspective from nationalism to economy in your book. I'm actually now on the second chapter. I'm reading
Ooh,
it.
I love the second chapter. It's my favorite.
So I'm asking this to expect some historians going in that direction of economic or Marxist analysis.
I think the first time I met Ivan was in Trieste. He had sent me an email about his dissertation, which he was just finishing. I think I met him like a week after he finished. And he was talking about wanting to work on socialism in Fiume. And I was like, but what's your angle? I mean, that just sounds so old school. And he started explaining it, and then I read the dissertation, and I just, this is where the stuff needs to be working, is seeing not just a Marxist analysis of power from the capital accumulation in the city, but also how the city isn't just that one story. I do think this global historical turn is about Marxism and where to go next. And I hope, and I've already gotten people asking me for stuff who want to start incorporating Fiume into these larger narratives about capitalism in the 20th century. So I do think it's happening. I'm hoping Ivan will publish his book. But I do think that what's going to happen is what you're saying. And maybe it's the right time. I mean, maybe we needed 30 years from the fall of the wall to be able to talk about capitalism in these ways around a post-socialist city. I'm looking forward to reading it. I'm not going to do it, but I'm looking forward to reading it.
Well, if I may just jump in, I mean, because I see Agnes is also here. I mean, Agnes is also, I mean, she has been processing I would say an enormous amount of data, also an economical history on Fiume Rijeka until 1918. So she also submitted her dissertation a few months ago, and we'll hopefully discuss it quite soon. And I think that her work will also be definitely quite an important addition to the field regarding this economical perspective and the relations between the capital, Budapest, and Fiume from this angle of economical history.
Yeah, I mean, this is where it has to go now, and I think that people are already asking these questions and doing the work like Agnes and Ivan are doing, because identity politics has taken up all the oxygen in the room, and we need to start figuring out what the room is. And I do think it's going to go this direction. I'm really looking forward to it. I just hope that it gets written in a way that is legible to people who don't care about economic history and who aren't necessarily as political as these themes tend to be. So I hope that these books get written in a way where it could have the same readership as someone who's going to read about identity politics. I just hope that we don't go into separate directions. That's what I'm most worried
about. Okay, thank you. I think that Renato is back and he's ready to ask.
Yeah, do you hear me now?
Yeah. Oh, you're on your iPhone now.
Yes, yeah, sorry. Thank you for giving me the floor. Firstly, okay, very interesting subject and the unique point of view. I will definitely buy a book. So I have one simple question. So did you feel a lot of responsibility writing this book to present everything transparently? The subjects of that time are obviously all dead, and there is not a single possibility that any of the subjects, at least conscious subjects of that time, is alive today. And as you said, there were not a lot of evidence of the mentality of that time. I believe it's quite stressful to write historical books, especially of that time and any time earlier, because there is a lot of responsibility to present everything as it was. And not to mention, it's a very touchy political situation, which is even controversial today, especially in the relation Rijeka-Trieste. We know how some Triestinis feel about that. And also you said that you're currently in Italy, probably Trieste. So I was wondering if you stumbled upon some comments of conservative Italians on your book.
Actually, this book was easier to write than the first one because I was so angry. I wasn't angry in the first book. In the first book, I was trying to retrieve a world that had been lost, and I was trying to show connections that were not very popular with the current historiographies. And I was really aware that a lot of Croatians would be upset about hearing that some of the fathers of the nation were fine with working with Italians and with thinking about Italy. And I was really worried about Italians trying to think of Italian nationalism as somehow better. So I was much more nervous about the first book. This book, I had a goal. The goal was to push D'Annunzio to the side. So it kind of made it easier to write because it was writing a way this dominance of this one historical story. So I felt like whatever I accomplished was more than we'd had so far. And that made it a lot easier. Obviously, it's always scary to write history, especially, as you mentioned, around tough topics that are still, heartstrings. But when that's, I guess typical is when that D'Annunzio statue thing in Trieste happened, I wasn't afraid at all about getting hated, because I just, it's too yucky. The people who would be angry at me for this book, I'm fine with being disliked. With the first book, I was actually
good point.
nervous about being disliked, because I was, at the same time as I was changing a history, I was changing it around things that, anyways, it was a less difficult history than the first. And the next one will be, I think, even easier, although I found some stuff yesterday about LaGuardia that make me uncomfortable. So, we always are nervous about what we're doing. That's good. That means we hope we're going to have readers. But the people who are going to hate me with this book are not the people that I'm as nervous about. And I'm in Italy. I'm already getting hate mail. It's fine. Anyone who doesn't dislike me already, it's just a matter of time. I'm not going to change.
And what will the third book be about?
LaGuardia. Fiorello LaGuardia, the mayor of New York, who lived in Trieste, Fiume, Zagreb, and Budapest for about 8 years before he became famous.
Thank you for answering.
Okay, maybe we have some more time for one last question, if it will show up. I will just add that it's so nice to see that there are so many research projects currently going on in Rijeka. I'm really looking forward to discuss these topics further, possibly in Rijeka.
It's the only way. None of us can do this alone. We need, we should create a meeting and go, okay, you go do this, I'll go do this, because it's an impossible history to do alone.
We should meet more and talk about those things.
Yeah, and also
the other
when
projects.
you guys grill me like this, I deserve a meal and a drink afterwards. Like this.
Yeah.
When we, this is why I hate Zoom. We're gonna close this down. I'm sweating, and then I'm just gonna be alone. Come on, guys. This is unfair.
Marco, come on. We're waiting for you.
Come
I know
on,
you want to
Marco.
ask something.
Come on.
Marco, Aide.
Yes, okay. Very spontaneously, I will try to address the question. It was a great talk, a great conversation. But I have a question about the definition of the book. You disclaimed that this is not a political history, but I was wondering if the book itself addressed the question, what is politics in an age of collapsing states? Because I see, a lot of people making politics in very different ways. And maybe the book itself is about what is politics in this age of transitions, in this age of, so politics is everywhere, especially in this contingency of crisis and transition. Then things change, and of course, everyday life takes its place, and common people go back to their stuff. But in these special moments, I think that politics can really expand into the society. And I was wondering if the book is about the role and meaning and nature of politics in these moments of crisis.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the state is incredibly important, and that individuals willingness to have the state in their lives, and if anything, the need, the open need of the state being in their lives, means politics is important. One of the things I never got to do as much as I wanted to do was follow the ballots, the making of the ballots in the first election in September 1919. And then the second round of ballots in December 1919. This is the first time women are voting, but they're really not voting. I mean, they're really being told yes or not yes. There's not a lot of real politics of the voice and the choice going on here, and yet people seem to really care. And really, not just the ones trying to manipulate the vote in order to show how popular Italian annexation is, but also the people who don't want to be included in that number. and so it's almost the people who don't want to be counted are even in some ways more political than the ones that we would normally recognize as being political actors. And this is going on here. And so, you know, I am sure that many people think of me as one of the authors of Habsburg nostalgia. No way around it, because I'm trying to say, hey, things are working kind of, and less people are dying kind of, and not dying is good. But I don't see a lot of loyalty for this Habsburg stuff. I don't see anyone crying about Sissi. She's dead, but I just don't see. So that all that discourse around the 1890s and 1900s and Habsburg loyalty and all this stuff, it's only 20 years difference. I don't see it at all in Fiume. I see the emblems, I see the laws, I see the thing, but I see people totally fine with forging and moving around and doing all this stuff. So it's not just about loyalty to Italianists. I don't see a lot of Habsburg loyalty either. And I'm thinking, just to answer your question, because I don't talk about this in the book at all, it might be kind of fun there aren't any Habsburgs. I mean, maybe what we're seeing going on here is without the metropole, there might be more loyalty to a Habsburg system because you don't have to be kissing up to the metropole anymore. I don't feel loss around those emblems of loyalty that we've been seeing in Habsburg historiography as explaining why the state stayed together. But again, I'm not reading letters. I'm not like seeing people. I didn't study how people named people. Like, how much do we keep on getting all those Habsburg names? How much does it start changing? I know all about the people naming and Garibaldi and Anita and whatever, but I didn't follow how many more Ferdinands and Frances and everything else is going on. So there, maybe I just didn't do it, and that's why I'm not seeing it. But I'm kind of answered your question. I kind of didn't. It is. I agree with you though. What does politics actually look like when you're in transition? Is a question that should be. That would be a great article. You should write that article.
I think most of the things are already in your book. So okay,
that was
you
like
very much.
offering me a drink. Thank you.
Fiume Crisis Part 2.
Are we done, Francesca?
Alcohol maybe now? Where is alcohol?
Yes, I think so. I suppose you are a bit tired, Dominique. We started with you for
2 hours.
2 hours.
With friends like this, who needs an inquisition?
So thank you so much for your time and your passionate energy and knowledge. Thank you, Ivan. Thank you, Natka. Thank you also to the Center for Advanced Studies, Sanya and Lucia, for their support. Thank you to everyone who contributed to the discussion and everyone who attended the seminar. I just wanted to remind you that today in the afternoon, there will be another seminar hosted by the Center for Advanced Studies. with Sasha Vejzagic, The Rise of Business Class and Managerial Elites in Yugoslavia from 1963 to 1978. So I wish you a nice day.
May I say just a word, Francesca? I was delighted. I'm a philosopher, but somehow when Marco was Bresciani, Marco Abram, Francesca, and I do hope that Ivan also will join us at some point. When they were at the center, when we were like very young institution, I felt that something is growing and blooming, and this is and then Vani is here. Vani is in Naples, but Vani is here in the center, and I do exchange already with Francesca. We need to continue this, so please do think that we are continuing it. And you guys, you're just great in your field of expertise. And I do think that there is a dialogue with other disciplines also that can be developed further.
I agree.
So thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone. I hope next time we do this, can we do this live next time? Let's do this
Correct.
live.
At Trieste in the Moïse Palace.
That sounds wonderful. Ciao, ciao.
Enjoy.
Thank you very much for having us.
Bye.
Bye.